Number 1. Ouija clocks in. This is far from the scariest tale I've heard narrated on this channel regarding the use of a Ouija board. It is nevertheless true. I'd welcome any feedback as to whether other listeners have had similar experiences. I have never been particularly frightened by the idea of the so-called supernatural. I have had enough experiences of one kind or another to suggest that currently unexplainable may be a more appropriate term for energies that we don't yet understand. I don't necessarily think it is wise to dabble with forces we do not understand either, though. So following this long ago incident, I never dabbled with the Ouija board again. I had recently begun dating my now husband. Since it was Halloween, we naturally thought it would be a bit of fun to try our luck with Ouija. At the time, I lived in a huge, rattletrap Victorian that had been divided into 5 apartments. I've lived there for 7 years. My favorite room was the kitchen, because the kitchen included one of those round towers so popular on big houses in that era. The tower was surrounded by windows that allowed a great view of the street, which was lined with similar old Victorians and was topped by a classic witch hat roof. My kitchen table was in this tower, and I especially loved sitting there on a Sunday with my morning coffee, watching parishioners file in and out of the Catholic church across the street. But I digress. It was at this table and in this tower that my boyfriend and I decided to hold our little seance one beautiful Halloween night. Up to this point, I'd never experienced anything remotely supernatural in this old house, despite its age and the numerous people who'd probably come and gone through it. The worst I've ever endured was a major infestation of mice. We had barely gotten started with Ouija. We never got further than, "Is there anyone here?" And suddenly an incredibly loud alarm jangled our nerves to the core. In fact, I'm pretty sure I screamed. After recovering somewhat, eyes huge with puzzlement, and perhaps also a touch of fear, we identified the deafening buzz as the timer on my old stove. Not only was the timer going off, but the clock on the stove was running something I've been unable to get it to do during the entire time I lived there. Now mind you, the stove was pretty ancient as stoves go, and based on its style, it probably dated back to the 1950s, or maybe even the 1940s, with its rounded edges, heavy build, and small oven capacity. I swore to my boyfriend up and down that I had not set the timer beforehand, and in fact, I'd never been able to get it to work. I showed him a separate timer I had to set whenever I used the oven to know when it was time to take food out. I told him the clock had never worked either. Now both were working. We stared at the stove, all creeped out, and decided our extremely brief Ouija session was over. We just ended it by saying never mind and goodbye. So why? Was my old stove possessed? If so, it wasn't a malevolent spirit. After this incident, both the clock and the alarm continued to work during the rest of my tenancy. Nor did any other incidents occur at the place to make me uneasy. Well, unless you count mice. In the end, we just had to chalk it up to one of those strange, unexplainable events that happened every now and then. Perhaps if we had continued the Ouija session, we would have learned more as to why it happened. But to be honest, we were just too creeped out at the time. Has anyone else had anything like this happen? I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Number 2. First, I want to say that I'm a big fan of your channel. I started listening to your stories about a week ago, and I've already watched about 25. This is a true story, so I hope you'll consider it. A few years ago, we moved into my current house. It's a nice house, in a nice neighborhood. We live near a creek, and we used to play in it a lot. That was until me and my friend had a scary experience. Me and my friend had only been friends for a few months. Let's call her Jessica. We were walking home from school and decided to play in the creek. We played for a little while. Then we found a man-made waterfall. We attempted to climb up the waterfall but stopped after a few tries. and we started to head back to our houses, but then we heard a huge splash, and we turned around and saw little animal bones and a rotting deer carcass floating down the creek. And we heard some rustling around from the waterfall area, so we looked to the top of the waterfall and saw something we will never forget. There was a very skinny, and I mean really skinny old man standing up by the waterfall. He made eye contact and he smiled. It was a chilling smile, though. He was super raggedy and had a long beard, and he started to walk hard. He started to walk towards us, so we ran. He had a raspy laugh, and he was laughing super hard. Then he started yelling at us, and I still don't remember what he said, but he said in a music-like voice, "Don't go. I'm hungry. Don't go. I'll find you if you leave." Thankfully, we made it back to my house. That may seem like the end, but it wasn't. He gave us chase, but he was a little slow. He pounded on the door and yelled at us. My friend and I locked the rest of the doors and the windows and hid in the bathroom. My friend proceeded to call the police. The operator said that some of the officers were en route to my home and would show up in 2 to 5 minutes. They came and couldn't find the man. They searched our house yard and around the creek. They ended up finding him a few days later. We have not been back to the creek since. Number 3. This happened yesterday, and it was the most scary experience of my life. Yesterday I was bored, so I began wondering what to do. So I had an idea to go for a swim. I then went to the shed in my backyard and got a pool float, and then I started to go for a walk. I was going to walk in the creek and go for a swim. When I arrived at the creek, I jumped in the water and started swimming. I was having a lot of fun, so I kept swimming. I told myself I was going to go as far as I could, so I kept swimming, and then I swam under a bridge. After a good amount of time, I swam under another bridge, but like the other bridge, I saw nothing there. After a long time of swimming, it was starting to get dark. I was wondering if I should go back, but I did not go back. I kept swimming. I found another bridge, but I saw the most disturbing thing I ever saw in my life. I saw someone in the distance. I could not see it first, but then I got closer, and I saw someone hanging on a rope. That person had hung himself, and I went up to him to see if he was alive. I tapped his shoulder, but he did not respond. I then tried feeling his pulse. His heart did not beat. I began freaking out, so I yelled, "Someone call 911, there's a dead body." But no one heard me. I then had an idea to go to someone's house, and then to tell them to call 911. So I walked out of the woods and I found an ice cream truck. I told the ice cream man to call 911, and he did. The cops came very fast. After that, I told the cops where the dead body was, and they found the body. Let's just say, it was very hard to sleep that night. Warning, the following story is about an incident that happened to a couple with a body modification fetish. Although there are no graphic descriptions in the story, if this subject matter is too intense for you, or something that you will find offensive, I suggest that you don't listen to the story, rather than get mad at me later after you do. Number 4. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's kind of a disturbing story. It's not one I tell very often for several reasons. I will try to leave out some of the more intense details, but it was an intense story. I have always been interested in sort of kinky fetishes. I don't want to go into detail about that because that's not really important. I mean, it is a kinky fetish that makes this story a bit scary, but, I don't know if I need to go too deeply into my practices, so to say. But I could also tell you that some of these fetishes of mine, turn off guys. So whenever I find somebody who really is into the kinks like I am, it's a pretty good thing. And that's when I met Mickey. Now, Mickey and we had some pretty similar kinks. But he had a few that were a bit more extreme than I usually knew about. He did those, I can't recall what it's called, but you know when people hang themselves with hooks through their skin? He did that. You know, but he also had some lighter kinks like, chastity and stuff like that. But the one that was probably the most hard to understand and intense is he had a castration fetish. Although he told me it was just a fantasy thing for him, it's not something that he'd ever actually do. So occasionally, I would indulge this fantasy. I'm sorry if this is too intense, but there'd be things like while we were having sex, I would, take a knife and put it up to his penis and say to him, I'm gonna cut this off. Things like that. I don't want to get too deeply into it, but it would really turn him on. I would never see him as aroused as he had been when we do that playing. Now, I don't really know if this is my fault or not, but I told you before we also liked chastity play. So, we did this for a very long time. I actually had him go about 2 months. I'm sure every guy who's listening to this story is probably thinking, holy shit, how could anyone go 2 months? Well, we did. Well, he did. And Mickey and I had a lot of fun during that time. So the scary part happens one day when I was out for a walk. It was dark and I usually like to take a walk at night. I had Mickey at home. He was doing a kinky assignment that I had for him. And that's when my cell phone started ringing. I picked it up, and it was Mickey. He told me, I have it banded up, and I have the knife we always play with. I have to do this. Now, at first I thought it was just Mickey trying to do a turn-on thing, so I told him, we're still doing the chastity thing, so you can't play around. And Mickey told me I'm not playing around. I need to do this, and I need to do it now. That's when I got worried, because I could tell in his voice that he meant it. And I said, Mickey, no, don't do that, don't do anything. I'm coming home right now. I turned, staying on the phone, and started running back towards the house, which was unfortunate because I was kind of far away. And I ran, and I kept on telling him on the phone, don't do this. And he kept telling me he was going to. And suddenly the phone went dead. I tried calling him back. He picked up the phone once and said something that is really just confusing to me. He said, my lobster is going to come and take you to show you my dorm room. Then he hung up. I didn't know what to think, although it sounded like he was kind of delirious, and it worried me that maybe he'd actually done it. So I got home finally, flung the door open, went into the bedroom, and I'm not going to tell you in any detail what I saw, but he did it, and I was just in shock. My first thing was concern for him, but he had put these bands on himself, so you would think there was a lot of blood, but there wasn't. So I told him first, and then I tried to call 911, but he knocked my phone out of my hand. He said, call Jimmy. Jimmy was an EMT that he knew. I told him, no, I gotta call 911. Call Jimmy. Mickey insisted, and the sound of his voice, I was so freaked out, so yeah, I called Jimmy. Jimmy came over, and I thought maybe Jimmy would be the person that would be able to take care of this. Jimmy came in the room and threw up immediately. He was shocked at what happened, of course. He also wanted to get Mickey to the hospital, but Mickey refused because he didn't want to be committed to a psychiatric hospital. But these lucid moments were few and far in between when he told us what he wanted to do, and he would lapse into some bizarre descriptions of things that I can't even remember, and I could tell that his mind was just messed up, and we just couldn't do what he wanted us to do. Jimmy got a hold of an ambulance and had the ambulance come, and we took Mickey to the hospital. Mickey had no memory of what he did to himself, and when he was recovering and realized what happened, he was of course terrified at first. He did spend some time in a psychiatric institution, but it wasn't really a long time. When he got out and when he was healed, he actually started liking the new version of himself. I was expecting him to break up with me because Jimmy called the ambulance when he didn't want to, but he has no memory of telling us not to call the ambulance. So, I know this isn't like a spooky story or something like that where someone dangerous tries to hurt somebody, but when the person you love mutilates himself, that's kind of freaky on its own. Mickey and I are still together. I love the guy, and he's never done anything to hurt himself again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the Cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.